Too many men are taking their own lives. Welcome back to my channel, and if this is your first time here, then I'd really love for you to stick around. I talk about mental health and well-being and challenge the ways that we look at it and perceive it. I talk about my own emotions, feelings, my childhood, how that impacts my life today, my struggles with anxiety, and how I still try to strive and move forward in my life in spite of some of that stuff. So if that feels like it might be a benefit for you, I'd really love for you to stick around and turn on the notifications so you know each and every time I post a video. So today I'm talking about a difficult subject, one that, though it's difficult, needs to be talked about more and had more open conversations around it, and that is suicide. And today I'm talking particularly about suicide in men, because we know that suicide is the biggest killer of men under 45 years old. Now, I know that suicide is a complex thing. With all the suicides that we see and that happen, each and every one comes with its own complex set of circumstances. But I want to talk today about some of the things that I believe that we can change and that we can control, and some of the influences that we're having as a wider society that I think are driving the numbers to be as high as they are. So I'm going to speak in broad terms, and I guess in some ways this is a bit of a disclaimer. When we know that the numbers are as high as they are, then there will be commonality. Now for me, I think if we really want to understand what's going on, we have to look at the way that we're raising boys. The way that we are raising them and the way that we are making them perceive the world and perceive what it is to be a man. Now, I think we have reached a stage in our society where we know that we shouldn't be telling young people to man up. We shouldn't be telling young people that boys don't cry. That still goes on, but I know that we're moving forward in that. But we have to look beyond that. We have to understand that although we're not saying directly that boys don't cry, that we're not saying directly man up, I still think we are teaching young people that in a different way. And this goes really wide. We've seen recently a couple of adverts banned. There was a Volkswagen advert that was banned, and I believe rightfully so. Not because it was offensive, but because of the stereotypes and the messages that we're sending out, particularly to our young people. Now, if you go into a generic shop that sells generic fashion for young children, you will always see that the girl stuff is pink and about princesses, and the boy stuff tends to be blue and with tigers and lions on them, strong. This in and of itself creates messages. It gives out messages. Now, I'm not saying the colours necessarily are causing a problem, but you see that the perception that we're giving out to young people, what we're feeding them, everything that we do has a message behind it. And young people are very, very intuitive, particularly before they've got a full grasp of language. And so they're learning in these signals that we give them. And like I say, we might not tell our young boys now to man up or that boys don't cry, but if we only congratulate them as being brave or courageous in the times when they look like they're going to cry and then they stop themselves, then we are teaching them that being brave and being strong is to not feel emotions and to not work through them. But nearly always, young boys are not ever allowed to be sensitive. They are never ever just sensitive. They are always too sensitive. And so when a young boy starts to find out who he is as a young person, starts to develop his sense of self, normally if his sense of self is an emotional, thoughtful, highly sensitive person, then he will nearly always kind of have that pushed out of him. And ultimately, as children, we are born with a need for attachment. And I've said this before, but when our attachment to the people that we seek attachment from is threatened, then our authenticity is what loses out. And so we teach young boys from a very young age that not to be sensitive, not to be emotional, that to be brave and strong and courageous and to be able to show up no matter what. And so what we're doing is forcing a large group of young boys into hiding, and they are creating a false sense of self from a young age. This is what I believe I did. And of course, like each and every time, there was lots of added complex reasonings why I started to hide, but at my core level, that sensitive part of me is the part that I was most afraid of. And so I created character to hide that. What do I do to hide sensitivity? I become very hard and tough and hide my emotions. And so as I started to grow up, I was becoming what I believed I should be as a boy and hiding who I really was. This meant pushing down emotions. This meant not feeling things that I felt. This meant, as a very sensitive person, I had to hide and bury all that down. And by the time I was 18, 19 years old, I was a character. Now, we know that loneliness is at the heart of the mental health epidemic that we see. We know loneliness, lack of connection, causes mental health struggles in and of itself. When you are hiding who you really are, you are always alone. And I believe this is what's happening to a lot of men. And so when we start to recognize how many young boys are sensitive and emotional and stuff, get easily caught up in their feelings, we start to realize how many people are hiding. On a simplistic scale, I think what happens is what happened to me. You create this character, you go through life as this character, you become very externally tough. I shaved my head, I got the tattoos, I seeked being a man's man, I worked hard and then went down the pub. I didn't get too emotionally involved with women. One, because I couldn't get too emotionally involved because I was pushing and burying all my emotions down, but also I was buying into this traditional sense of what masculinity was. I think what lots of men are doing, they're reaching the age of 28, 29, 30, into their 30s, and they are struggling to keep these emotions down that they've never processed. They're struggling to hide that part of themselves for as long as they've had to hide it, and they feel terribly lost and feel terribly alone. They've built a family around them based on a character that they thought made them a man. And so they can't reach their wives who they've married or their partners who they're married. They feel like they can't reach them. They don't feel connected to their children because the real part of them is hidden and it's buried. For me, I always say the single biggest thing that I've done for my healing was that because of circumstantial stuff, I reached a place where I came out and I said, I'm not who I've said I was, right? But in a way, I was fortunate that my marriage had already failed. I kind of lost everyone around me, and so I could rebuild as this new person anyway. But if you're in a marriage with your children and this happens to you and you feel like your wife doesn't know who you are, you don't know who you are, it becomes very, very difficult to break down 30 years of what you've built based on someone else. And I think this is where lots of men begin to struggle. They're not even aware of what's going on. They're not aware of the sensitive side that they've buried. They're not aware of why they feel so lonely. They just feel terribly lost. And that's where you start to get deep depression being depressed emotions that are pushed down. It's a coping mechanism. It starts off as a coping mechanism in a lot of cases and then turns into depression. They suffer terribly with anxiety because they feel so alone. Their body doesn't know how to cope and with all the sensitivity because their body's reacting as a sensitive person, but they've never ever built any defense against that other than just pretending. So how do we change that? Well, the way that we're going to have to start changing that is to have more conversations like this. We need to really start to break away from this old traditional style of masculinity, one that I believe was built around a sense of power, and we need to promote that being sensitive is good. We need to promote more in our society that being a sensitive boy who's in their emotions is a good thing. It can be one of the most amazing things when it's nurtured properly. And then we need to do all we can to stop these young boys hiding. And ultimately, we really need to start looking at the messages that we're feeding our young people. This isn't about taking offense. This isn't about people being offended. This isn't even about sexism. This is about the messages and the pressure that we're putting on people to become something rather than allowing people to be who they are. The saying of it's not what it is to be a man, it's what it is to be a human. We need to let children be and nurture who they are without a preconceived notion of what they should be. Because if they believe that their attachment is threatened by who they really are, then they're lost and then they're hiding. Then we get mental illness. So again, this has been a very complex and deep subject, but it's one that I've really wanted to tackle, and it's one that I'm going to tackle more and more in the future. But hopefully you can start to see that the way that we we put pressure on young people to become certain thing. You have to be X, Y, and Z to be a man. I believe that's forcing people into hiding. When you're in hiding, you're lonely. When you're lonely, you struggle with mental health problems. You build up layers and layers and layers as a defense to that, and by the time you reach your 30s, you're completely lost and you have no idea why. We need to tackle this at the young age, right? So we need to be talking to young people about this, and we really need to at least start to reframe and pull down the destructive parts of masculinity that have been built up for so long. If this video has been useful to you, then please make sure that you do like it to help the channel grow. As ever, you can catch me on all my socials. I'm more than happy to discuss and challenge myself on some of the things that I've said. I'm always looking to learn and grow more. It's not about making myself right, it's about exploring, unpacking, and having the open and difficult conversations. I'll see you again next week.